You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, world, and welcome to Tales from Hollywoodland, a veritable feast of movies, television, Broadway, showbiz stories, news and gossip, with Julian Schlossberg, Arthur E. Friedman, and Stephen Jay Rubin. Today is our first anniversary episode, so of course, we're looking at Hollywood Hunks. And now, here's Steve.
Happy birthday, everybody.
Yes.
It's our 1 year.
Happy anniversary to the crew.
It's definitely using the term of the day, a hunk of good loving here. I was thinking before the podcast about the term hunk. How would you define it? I remember hearing a word in my youth called beefcake, which referred to guys when they took their shirt off. There was a lot of beefcake. I think you could apply it to the terminology of the movie business, that guys who took their shirt off and showed off their pecs, I think were hunks. Would you agree?
Well, it certainly would be part of a definition, but I mean, I was kind of thinking in terms, before we do the modern times, I was thinking in terms of what we all grew up with. And they were really something. I mean, they were unbelievable. Who am I talking about? Clark Gable, Burt Lancaster, Cary Grant, Kirk Douglas, Gregory Peck, Errol Flynn, Robert Mitchum, Clint Eastwood, Sean Connery, Paul Newman, Robert Redford, Steve McQueen, Marlon Brando, Rock Hudson, and the Duke himself, John Wayne. Nobody compares to these guys today, in my opinion. But once again, it's a generational thing, or at least in my case. I mean, there's plenty of good guys. We'll talk about them today. But what a group I just read off. What a group of...
Well, you know, but they passed the baton. In the early 1950s, there was a gentleman in Hollywood who was an agent named Henry Wilson, who happened to be gay. Who happened to have a great eye for good-looking guys, and particularly those who were hunks, big, tall guys and handsome, and you know, this was his thing. And he found a guy named Roy Shearer Jr., changed his name to Rock Hudson. You want to talk about a Hollywood hunk? There's your definition of a tall, broad-shouldered, great-looking man. And it wasn't really necessary that he could act great, because they could teach him how to do a lot of that stuff. But that started for Henry Wilson a so-called stable of these kind of guys. Rory Calhoun, Guy Madison. This was the 1950s. And this was the age of a lot of these guys really just couldn't act. But again, it didn't make that much of a difference, because crazy as it seems, a lot of people can't act. But if they look good and read the lines well and memorize them, you know, and they keep doing different takes. It took Rock Hudson 38 takes in his first movie, which happened to be 1948, to make the line come out right. But those Hollywood hunks that Julian mentioned, of course, were, in that case, they were some great actors. Didn't have to be so tall, like John Garfield, who was a hunk, was not tall. And there were others, Alan Ladd. But in the 1950s, it seemed like Troy Donahue and Robert Wagner and Tab Hunter. These are a lot of the guys that Henry Wilson agented. And they made movies that did business. So
I'd like to bring up somebody that predates those guys. And I don't know if it was his first movie, but he was in 1 Million Years BC. It was an actor named Victor Mature. And Victor would later play Samson to Hedy Lamar's Delilah in a Cecil B. DeMille. Would you consider Victor Mature one of those guys, Arthur?
Of course. Sure. A little predated. He was in the late 40s, probably. The great story about Victor Mature was he was a kind of a carefree guy, and he was told there was a party in the Hollywood Hills, and that to come naked, to put a coat on, everybody was going to be naked at this party. And he fell for the joke and the door opened and he opened up his coat and he was naked and everybody was wearing tuxedos. Victor Mature. But yeah, sure. Samson and Delilah, absolutely.
He had an appliance store on Pico Boulevard for many years called Vic Mature's Appliances.
Well, and that could have been applied to a lot of different things.
Also had that big voice. Another thing that Henry Wilson demanded was the big voice. With Rock Hudson, his voice was much higher, and he had him bring it down and down to be more masculine.
You say, would you consider Victor Mature just put a measuring tape from one shoulder to the other? That guy could have been a football player. He had a huge spread of shoulders.
Yeah, he was one of my favorite actors of that period. I'm thinking of someone else. Another actor I really liked, also from kind of the same period, was Cornel Wilde. Cornel Wilde was definitely a physical actor. I always remember him in Cecil B. DeMille's The Greatest Show on Earth, which won the Best Picture that year in 1952. But I was working at a production office in Hollywood one year, and the phone rang, and it was Cornel Wilde looking for Noah Dietrich. I may have told you this story before. Noah Dietrich was one of Howard Hughes's right-hand men back in the day, and I thought it was a friend of mine playing a joke on me because he knew I was a big Cornel Wilde fan. So for about 5 minutes, I was telling Cornel Wilde that he wasn't Cornel Wilde. Finally convinced me, and there you have it. But that was my only brush with Cornel Wilde.
One of the original hunks was a guy named Johnny Weissmuller, who was an Olympic swimmer who came back and they put him into Tarzan.
And then they did Buster Crabbe, another
came later.
Athlete.
Yeah, came later.
Yeah,
Buster Crabbe.
Weissmuller was a star.
Elmo Lincoln was the first Tarzan. I think it was in the silent films. But Tarzan kind of defined what a hunk was because he doesn't wear a suit. He wears basically a loincloth.
Well, that's right. That was part of, being the big hunk and swinging from the trees. It's a funny thing, but again, a lot of these guys did not have to be great actors. Some not even good actors. And there was one of the great lines from a great song and chorus line is, if Troy Donahue could be a movie star, then I can be a movie star. And Troy Donahue was just not a great actor, but for a while he was a movie star. Again, who fitted the hunk thing. Robert Wagner was one of those guys too, good actor. But he was a terrific looking guy. The 1950s was all about good looking actors and good looking actresses, including Marlon Brando, who was a hunk and a great actor at that time.
I hired Troy Donahue, Arthur, for a game show appearance. We did a show for Columbia Pictures Television called Trivial Combat. It was a kind of inspired by Trivial Pursuit. And I had to write his little intro. And I'll never forget, I said that, and our next guest is a perfect companion for a Palm Springs weekend. Here's Troy Donahue. And I have him on camera with the great eye roll of all time.
I met him later on. Jeepers, must have been in the 1990s. He and Sandra Dee, who my wife managed at the time in the 90s, went up to the Castro Theater in San Francisco for a celebration of Summer Place, of the movie Summer Place. And I met Troy, good guy, big guy, older obviously at the time, and he was big. I mean, there were a couple of movies he made other than Summer Place. So what were they? Julian, Steve, help me with this.
Well, Summer Place was
Parish.
Summer Place, I think, was his biggest film.
He was the master of those romantic dramas.
Palm Springs Weekend.
Palm Springs Weekend. He actually did a Raoul Walsh Western called A Distant Trumpet, based on a Paul Horgan novel. Good novel, but it didn't quite work.
But he really was not a very good actor.
Not a great actor.
And I think it's stretching to call him a hunk. From my point of view, he wouldn't be in my hunk list. He wouldn't even be in my sub-hub list. But
you'd have an argument there, because I think he kind of was. He was a tall, good-looking guy and fitted the description. We haven't mentioned Robert Mitchum from the 40s into the 50s. He was a real hunk, considered a hunk, a good actor at that.
Yeah, I did mention him, but yes.
You did? Okay.
Yeah. But, I guess for a more modern kind of guy, you got to start out with a guy like George Clooney, who really cut his teeth on television. He had little roles in things like Roseanne. He played in Her Boss and things. He really worked it. He didn't really just become an overnight sensation. His father was Nick Clooney, and Nick Clooney was on AMC. The beginning for 5 years, he would be the guy introducing movies. And, of course, his aunt was Rosemary Clooney. So he had a nice pedigree, to say the least. And
very much so. He became really big with ER, though, on TV.
Well, he wasn't in the ER of the ER. There's 2 ERs. It's kind of a strange thing to look up. But he had... But all of these guys that we're going to be talking about that are modern, some of the biggest guys, all of them have a little bit of a physical problem of sort. For example, George Clooney, had Bell's palsy, and he actually talked about it on Larry King's show. It was interesting. I'm also told, I don't know if it's true, that he was in the attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Do you guys remember that?
No, I remember him being around for years, though. I met George Clooney a couple of times. This Bell's palsy thing is something I had as a teenager, and it lasted 6 weeks. The doctor said this will last for 6 weeks, and it will go away, and it was over in 6 weeks to the day. I don't think Clooney has any kind of residual effect from that.
I don't think so either.
But by the way, we shot baskets one time behind the stage of ER. They had a basketball hoop there. And he could play basketball. He could shoot. But by the way, had as good a presence on screen as any actor. He was a star. But it took him a long time.
I will tell you that his sartorial change was very key, because you see a lot of those early TV appearances, and he's wearing long hair. When he cut his hair to play the pediatric doctor on ER, I think the hunk factor multiplied exponentially. I think women really gravitated toward him.
Looked like a whole different person. In the movie Good Night, Good Luck, he was great. Good movie, terrific movie.
Yeah, and he directed it as well.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you something that I don't think has been announced. He's coming to Broadway in Good Night and Good Luck. Not only is he coming, he's going to be starring in it, and he wrote the play. He actually adapted it as a play. So it'll be interesting to see.
Play Murrow, Julian?
I don't think he'll play Murrow. I think he'll probably play what he did in the movie, Fred Friendly, I think.
Oh, Fred Friendly.
I think.
That should be a hell of a Broadway show.
That'll be that's going to be a sensation. That will be sold out. That show will sell out. He's a giant movie star, and those ocean movies, not that he needed something to push him bigger, but that made him even bigger. And he has a great philosophy. He says, I'll make those movies so I can make the kind of movies I want to make. And he makes Syriana, and he makes Good Night and Good Luck. It's a great idea. Idea.
Had a long road to get there, but when he got there, he made the best of it. Would we consider Tom Cruise a Hollywood hunk, because he's not tall and big and what have you, but the screen makes him look bigger than life, and he's great at what he does.
Just watch the volleyball sequence in Top Gun, and you'll see that it kind of is definitely a hunka moment. Val Kilmer with his shirt off, Rick Rossovich with his shirt off, Anthony Edwards, who was from ER as well. That's a defining scene of hunkdom, definitely. I'd like to talk about the early 60s. Joe Levine, the great film producer, brought Steve Reeves to the big screen in Hercules. And I got to tell you, those Hercules movies, and there were a number of them, there were a number of European shot sequence movies that featured hunky guys. And I think Steve Reeves became a major star in the early 60s because of that.
Well, Arthur mentioned Rock Hudson had to bring his voice down. Steve Reeves had a higher voice than Rock Hudson.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe Levine, who I knew very well, actually had him looped. He wasn't even his voice playing Hercules and Hercules Unchained. But I want to go back to Tom Cruise for a moment because of two things. One, it was risky business the first time that he really made a breakthrough, and then, of course, followed it with Top Gun. But the most interesting thing for me was that at one point I was friendly and representing Dustin Hoffman, and they had just finished Rain Man. And he said, you know that young man, Tom Cruise? And I said, sure, I know him. He said he's going to be a giant star. Giant. I said, well, why? What do you say? He says he's the real thing. He said he is the real thing. And when you look at Rain Man, in a peculiar way, Cruise has to play his role and half of Dustin's because Dustin doesn't say much. So Dustin was totally impressed with him, and I think he's proven to be just that.
But with all due respect to Dustin, at that time, Julian, 1989, Tom Cruise was a superstar at that time.
Well, he hadn't hit what he hit with with what's happened, and I think he just kept going up.
Top Gun made him a superstar, and that preceded Rain Man. But
it did.
The dynamic of the casting between him and Dustin Hoffman was fantastic.
Yeah,
and Barry Levinson directed that. It was a great movie.
Tom Cruise pre-Top Gun did a movie called Taps with Timothy Hutton and a young Sean Penn, and George C. Scott played the military school. Right. And you look at Tom Cruise in that movie, he's a little overweight. He's not looking as svelte as he would.
He was chunky.
You had no idea that he was going to head down the road to Top Gun and beyond. And of course, he's become such a star with these Mission Impossible movies.
That's what really has put him to an time.
Well, beyond. But Steve, don't leave out what Julian mentioned. The risky business came after Taps. There was even a little movie in there before, which a friend of mine, Carrie Brokaw, produced called Tijuana something or another, that had Tom Cruise right after Taps. And it was just a group of guys who go to Tijuana. But, he hadn't yet made it. But risky business broke him out without question.
Oh, yeah, very much so, because you also had The Outsiders.
That's
he was
right.
in that,
he was
too.
One of those. That's right. But, he grew up in a very, very poor childhood, had a father who was an abusive father. And I mentioned Bell's palsy with George Clooney. He's dyslexic, Tom Cruise. He has dyslexia. So it's interesting that these guys that we're going to be speaking of, some of the biggest names in Hollywood, all seem to have a couple little things. So, even when people say, oh, I wish I could be, I wish I had his, and there's plenty of there are other downsides to all of this.
What's interesting, I think what's really interesting is that movie stars that we grew up with in the 50s, let's say, were known to be good looking. I mean, you had to be good looking. You had to be Robert Redford or Paul Newman or Steve McQueen or Farley Granger or whoever these guys were that were good looking. Somewhere there was a defining moment when something happened and along came Al Pacino and Robert De Niro.
It was called The Graduate with Dustin Hoffman.
There it is. Yeah. Yeah.
That's what changed it.
Yeah, I don't think you can call Dustin Hoffman a hunk.
Well, he got a hell of a good build, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, short, but well built. But that was it. And everything went, you didn't have to any longer be this great looking so-called movie star guy. You could be Sean Penn, and you could be short, and you could be, but you needed to act, and you needed to have an edge. And I think that probably defines movie stars more than anything. Is having an edge, that's something different, that it factor. But I got to tell you, if you stay with Rock Hudson for a moment, what a career he had. Holy mackerel.
And he turned out to be a good actor on top of it.
A very good actor, yes. Yeah. And made it big time into TV as well. So he transitioned. But, talk about a movie you want to see, Hunks. Again, let's go years later. There's a movie called Gladiator with Russell Crowe and a friend of mine named Ralph Moeller, who was Arnold Schwarzenegger's best friend. Then there's Arnold Schwarzenegger. Want to talk about a hunk? Not as tall as you think, but he definitely defines the word hunk. Would you all agree?
Oh, absolutely. You'd have to even say our boy Sly Stallone. whether you like his acting or not, and actually he's gotten better as an actor, which I guess there was nowhere to go but up. But the other person that we should talk about, the Ocean's 11 co-star of Brad Pitt, who came on the scene and his breakthrough was Thelma and Louise. But I will tell you of a story that I had. I had a movie called Across the Tracks, and it starred Rick Schroeder, who had been the little kid and then the big kid on NYPD, and Carrie Snodgrass. And if you look at that movie, the third name says, "and introducing Brad Pitt." So that was his first movie called Across the Tracks, where he had a role. He had been an extra in a lot of films. And again, as I mentioned before, with the Bell's palsy and with the dyslexia, Brad Pitt has been in AA. I mean, he's an AA member. He also has what a lot of actors seem to have, which is face blindness. He doesn't know necessarily who you are unless he recognized the voice or he knows who he's going to be meeting. Alan Alda told me he has that. So it's kind of interesting that these guys seem to have these kind of problems. But back to Thelma and Louise, that was really something. I mean, I don't remember too many guys coming on a screen and making a gigantic splash as he did.
Yeah, breakout movie star. I worked with Robert Redford as consultant on theatrical distribution for his movie A River Runs Through It. My daughter came out from Boston, and my son at the time was, I don't know, about 12. So I brought them up to Bob Redford's office. I had to do a little something there with him. And so this is probably a couple of weeks after River Runs Through It opens up. And we're in the office on Montana Avenue, and we're waiting outside in the outside office, waiting to go in and see him. And I thought I'd introduce my daughter to him, because she was a huge fan of Redford's. She was at the time maybe 19 years old. And long story short, we're in the outside office, and a door of the bathroom opens up, and out comes Brad Pitt. Well, my daughter, my God, Brad Pitt. She already knew Thelma and Louise, and she had loved River Runs Through It. He was a movie star. And she, wow, it was great. And out comes Redford now to say hello. So he's got Brad Pitt on one side, Redford on the other side, and my daughter's 19 years old. What can I say? My son was looking at the sports pictures on the wall, But Jenny was just blushing, and I had mentioned to Redford that, she's not looking at Robert Redford, Bob. She's looking at Hubble Gardner, the way we were. But Brad Pitt is a movie star. Again, a long career. Look at this career this guy's had.
Well, he so deserved the Oscar in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He was so good, as was Leonardo DiCaprio. And I would say that DiCaprio is also a bit of a hunk, although obviously a smaller guy. I don't think you have to be muscle-bound and Steve Reeves size to be classified as a hunk. Alan Ladd was a very small man, but the women just loved him, and I would say that they probably would think of him as a hunk.
Did any of you guys know Marvin Worth, a movie producer?
I only know he did Lenny. I know he produced
The reason I ask is Marvin was a great old guy, and I got to know him, and he discovered DiCaprio as a kid. And he had told me, anybody else he would speak to, this kid is going to be a movie star. And he was at the time maybe 12 years old or 13. And Marvin was holding him to play in a feature film of the James Dean story. And he said he'll wait until he gets old enough to do it because he's going to be a star. Well, is he ever right?
Yeah, he was so good in this movie, Who's Eating Gilbert Grape?
Yes.
Oh, my God. I remember thinking, who the hell is this kid? He was great in that. That was one hell of a role. Well, another guy we can talk about who is as good a looking as any man I've ever met is Hugh Jackman, who really is just a knockout. And here's a guy who's from Australia and really got involved in theater in Australia. So much so, Arthur, you'll be interested that he played Joe Gillis in Sunset Boulevard. And that was his role, the William Holden role in the musical. And, of course, on Broadway, he's been sensational and done fantastic work.
I maintain that Joe Gillespie, of course, Bill Holden, who was a hunk, great looking man. To this day, I'll tell anyone, out of all of the movie stars that have crossed my path through the years, I've never seen a better looking man in person than William Holden. I just have never seen it. Once had an interesting lunch with Terry Moore and Barbara Bach and Nancy Olson. Talk about a beautiful woman. In the Cafe Roma in Beverly Hills. We were having lunch together. No reason to discuss why, but anyway. And the subject became, who's the best looking actor that ever lived? And, so the girl said, what do you think? And I said, I think it's Bill Holden. And Nancy Olson said, I agree. He was really stunning.
And she should know. She co-starred with him in Sunset Boulevard in the movie.
Of course. But Terry Moore looked and said, trust me, sweetheart. It was Tyrone Power, okay? Just trust me. I forget what Barbara Bach said, somebody else, but Bill Holden was a hunk, happened to be a hell of a good actor. Unfortunately, he had a problem with alcohol for most part of his life. But
I think his high point is in Bridge on the River Kwai when he's takes his shirt off in the jungle. I'm sure the women were swooning for that one.
Yeah, what a movie! My favorite, probably one of the greatest movies ever made. But Stalag 17, Sunset Boulevard, Sabrina. There are so many movies. This guy was great. And Network later on, when age weathered his face, he was fantastic in that movie. And that movie spoke to the future. Shall we all agree on that?
Very prescient.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Patty Chayefsky.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I want to get back to Hugh Jackman if I can, because obviously Wolverine was this giant breakthrough with him, but it wasn't written for him. It was written for Russell Crowe. And Russell Crowe couldn't do it, but he knew Hugh Jackman, and he suggested Hugh Jackman get the role, and that's how Hugh Jackman got it. And I met Hugh Jackman. I would say that I don't think there's ever been a more charming person on the planet than Hugh Jackman. I met him twice, and both times, I swear to you, I just thought, this guy has got everything, looks intelligent and smart and everything. He did The Boy from Oz about Peter Allen, won the Tony on Broadway for that. He played Harold Hill in The Music Man. He was nominated for the Tony on that. He's just a terrific, charming, wonderful actor, and I would imagine he even played Curly in Oklahoma in the West End. So he loves musicals. He's got a wonderful singing voice. He can act. He can do it all. So
he was also in a movie. Steve, remind me the name of the movie about the showman, the circus. Not that long ago.
Oh, yeah, he played a P.T. Barnum kind of guy.
He did. And the movie, strangely, in today's day and age, when a movie has to open to these crazy numbers, that movie, please find the name of that, Steve, if you can. The Greatest Show on Earth, something like that.
No, it wasn't that. But
it wasn't. No. Yeah, but it opened just so. It didn't look like it was going to do much, but it started chugging and became a blockbuster, which really happens today. It used to happen years ago, but today you get out of the box big or you're dead. I'll give
you that title in a second.
Please, yeah.
It's The Showman, something about The Showman.
The Greatest Showman.
And it was a terrific movie.
But for charming, I will say that my favorite Hugh Jackman movie played opposite Meg Ryan, a movie called Kate and Leopold. It's kind of a time travel comedy, just a beautiful film. Funny and anachronistic, and one of the most charming movies I've seen. And he's perfectly cast as a gentleman from the 1880s who comes to modern New York City and has to go on a commercial to sell margarine. He takes a taste of. Anyway, it's pretty funny. I'd like to mention an actor named Jim Brown, former football player, who came into to movies in the early 70s. And
late 60s.
Late
60s.
Actually, late 60s with The Dirty Dozen. You're absolutely right, Arthur. But I remember him in a movie called Tick, 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 where he spent most of the movie with his shirt off. But Jim Brown was a hunk of a man, definitely.
Also the greatest running back in football history.
Yes. Yes, very much so. And then I would also say that Carl Weathers, opposite Stallone in the Rocky movies, also a hunky guy, certainly a beef. And then more recently, I would say that Denzel Washington is more of an intellectual actor, but also very hunky.
And Dwayne Johnson.
Dwayne Johnson, The Rock.
That's right.
He defines hunkdom today.
I think he's hunkdom. You know, the most handsome man I've ever met in my life was not a movie actor, even though Warren Beatty wanted him to star in Heaven Can Wait. He wasn't going to star in it originally, was Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali, when I met him, it looked like there was a key light on him. I had never seen any skin like that. I've never seen, the man was beautifully built. It was an incredible thing, and amazing how someone can really look like there's a key light on them.
He did. He looked like, without question, as good looking. He was unbelievable. I was jeepers, about 20 years old. A friend of mine was a junior agent at William Morris in New York. He's like, "Hey, Arthur, come on, I got to go up and pick up Cassius Clay at the St. Teresa Hotel in Harlem." Well, he was Cassius Clay then. He was about to fight a guy named Doug Jones, a big deal fight in New York, which would lead to Sonny Liston and the rest to Muhammad Ali. So anyway, we get up to the hotel on 125th Street, whatever it is in Harlem, and there's this big crowd in front of the hotel, and there's Cassius Clay dancing around and having a great time with Pee Wee Marquette, who was the midget, who used to be the greeter at Birdland. Pee Wee Marquette was what a piece of work Pee Wee Marquette was. Quincy Jones years later told me they used to call Pee Wee Marquette a quarter of a motherfucker. I mean, come on, it doesn't get better than that. The guy was a midget. Anyway, there's Cassius Clay, gets into the car, runs away from this crowd. He was a star before he was a star. I mean, he was a star then, but man, was he incredible looking. He looked like a Greek god. Yeah. And from the car ride down to William Morris and all that, he was cracking jokes. He was saying things that I will not say, but he was. You're right, Julian. He did. He looked like he had a key light on him. He was like an angel. It was angelic. Yeah,
just amazing.
I'd like to go back to Clark Gable for a second, because I know you all know this, that when he made the movie in 1934, It Happened One Night, which won the Oscar that year for Best Picture, and he decided that he wasn't going to wear an undershirt. So when he took off his shirt and showed his actual upper torso, that was considered a major challenge to the censors, although they passed it. Definitely, I think, didn't they say at the time that undershirt sales plummeted?
Underwear, that's right. Exactly what they said. He had destroyed in the 30s the undershirt business. I went to see the original One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest on Broadway, and in it was Kirk Douglas as the star in the Jack Nicholson role. McMurphy, and the Billy Bibbit, the stutterer, was an unknown actor named Gene Wilder, and the Will Sampson big role of the Indian was Ed Ames of the Ames Brothers. But the point I'm going to make is that Kirk Douglas at one point, as McMurphy, comes out of a room with nothing but a towel on. That's all he's wearing, totally chested out, big chest out. And in the audience, you hear women literally moaning and groaning at that time. I thought, hey, he doesn't even have any hair in his chest. But that was my feeling. But it was great to see they knew. I mean, believe me, that was not necessary. I guarantee it wasn't even in the play when it was originally written, but it was put in for the right reason for the audience.
I'll give you a classic hunk of the 1950s, certainly into the 60s, was Clint Walker.
Oh, yeah.
Came out of a Western on TV and into the movies, and not a great actor, but great-looking guy, very nice man.
Huge.
Cheyenne was the show.
Cheyenne, yeah.
And of course, like Lee Marvin and Jim Brown, he's in the Dirty Dozen. He plays Posey.
Yep.
Samson Posey.
Yeah. Can you mention the Dirty Dozen, Steve? Do you know them?
The problem with mentioning the 12 Dirty Dozen is there's 4 actors in there who were not. They were fillers, so they were not stars. In fact,
how many can you get? Can you get Trini Lopez?
Oh, there's Trini Lopez, Donald Sutherland, John Cassavetes, obviously Clint Walker we just mentioned, Charles Bronson.
Yeah.
Well, Bronson would be another hunk for a lot of people.
Oh, sure. Charlie Bronson, definitely. And then we mentioned Steve McQueen. Steve McQueen, to me, was one of the great movie stars of all time. That's another thing that someone recently told me, that there are very few movie stars anymore. I mean, there are obviously actors all over the place. There's more actors than ever. But who's a movie star today? Who do people say, oh, I'm going to go see that guy's movie? You know,
The Rock.
The Rock may be the closest we have. Well, I mean, Will Smith had a run there for about 10 years where everybody went to see a Will Smith movie. That kind of fell apart the last few years.
No, he just had a big hit. The boys are back.
I'm saying before that, he was on a definitely. And let's just say that the slap hurt around the world hurt one of his best movies that nobody went to see, which was a slave era movie about the Civil War that none of us saw.
Well, you know, we should talk about someone that I'm sure Steve can talk about for hours, because he was huge as hunk and an actor, and that was Sean Connery. It doesn't get much better than Sean Connery in the hunk department, with his tattoos and all.
He started out as a bodybuilder, and I think his first big role was in the chorus of South Pacific in England. I mean, he used to sing There Ain't Nothing Like a Dame and Bloody Mary, those kinds of songs. And he was not the first choice for James Bond. There were a number of people considered, including some Americans. I think the funny thing I heard once, because I researched this for years, is that on the early casting lists, Steve McQueen, Paul Newman, of course, none of these guys would be cast because they weren't Brits or they weren't UK. But one of the people they thought about was Jimmy Stewart. And can you picture him introducing himself? My name is Bond, James Bond. That wouldn't have worked.
I don't think he would have gotten 007 out.
But your impression did. That was good. It was a good impression.
I mean, Sean Connery in 1962 had just done The Longest Day with 42 other stars, and he gets cast as James Bond. You will respect this, Arthur, because you were in the theatrical business. The theater owners, supposedly disparagingly at some of the conventions, were referring to him as that limey truck driver. They had no respect for Sean Connery. They thought he was an unknown hunk. And all he had to do was sit there at that Baccarat table or chemin de fer. Someone has to explain me the difference between chemin de fer and Baccarat. I think they're very similar.
We're not going to do it today.
It's one number, I think. It's
when he
double
says,
zero. Sean Connery was a major star the moment he hit the screen in James Bond. The moment.
Oh yeah, no, it was huge. And
Arthur, you were at United Artists. My memory was Dr. No and From Russia with Love did well, but yes. Goldfinger. It was Goldfinger that was this giant breakthrough that then they brought back you guys, Dr. No and From Russia with Love, even as a combination.
Yeah, I think Dr. No was 1962 or 3, Steve?
Early 63. It was released in England in 62, followed by From Russia with Love in early 64.
Right, but let's understand something. I was at United Artists as of 1964, and Goldfinger came that Christmas. But the reason for our listeners that the James Bond thing caught on as it did was a big thing. President Kennedy at the time plugged the book. He was a reader of
Ian Fleming
books.
Fleming
that got the word out, and then there they came. Now, Dr. No did okay. From Russia with Love did better. 2 really good movies, by the way. And Goldfinger broke through, broke records, and was a blockbuster of its day, without any question. Followed by Thunderball, which did even better. After the screening of Thunderball, one of the exhibitors in Boston, a rocket scientist without question, came up to me and said, "This is the end of this whole thing. This movie stinks and it's nothing, and this whole thing is going away." He really knew what he was talking about. And so, we see and hear things like that all the time.
Arthur, let me just jump in because Julian mentioned the double feature re-release in 60. Let's see, that would have been 65. I would love to see the numbers on the re-release of Dr. No and From Russia with Love, because I will maintain forever that was probably the most successful double feature re-release ever, because a lot of people did not see Dr. No and From Russia with Love, even though they did well at the box office.
We had two big double releases, and those were big. I guarantee you they were in the millions of dollars, especially in drive-ins. Dr. No and From Russia with Love were big deals in drive-ins. We had another one that we did called Irma La Douce and I think Tom Jones. We released as a double feature, big. No, you can do that in those days because people were playing double features, especially the drive-in theaters, which is a whole other world that is almost no longer exists.
It's very interesting. Go ahead, Steve.
I was going to say, would you consider Albert Finney a hunk?
I guess. Sure. He's a pretty good actor, Albert Finney. My Lord.
Terrific actor.
To this day, never understood Tom Jones being the hit that it was. That happens sometimes. I'm sure we can all list certain movies that you look at and say, wow.
Well, it had a couple of wonderful things in it, including breaking the fourth wall and talking to the audience. That was always a very unique thing, and when it works, really
coming
worked.
Coming out, it looked like an art film, and it blossomed into something much bigger. Again, another United Artists movie. But Sean Connery, yes, a hunk, but what a movie star. You know, it's one of those things, again, every now and then we see something like that where an actor hits the screen and you know it. You know that. And this guy, Henry Wilson, had that kind of an eye, and he would choose these guys and had made a fortune with them through the years. He developed, guys were, and he changed the name. Tab Hunter was another name entirely, and I think Farley Granger was part of it. Again, specifically in the 50s.
You mentioned Connery, but you also have to say Roger Moore, because Roger Moore introduced the character of James Bond to a whole new generation. By early 70s, 10 years after the first release, there are a whole new generation of younger viewers who really enjoyed the lighter comedy spirit of Roger. Now, his Bond was much different than Sean's. Sean's basically, Tom Mankiewicz once told me he wrote some of the Roger Moores. He said, when Sean Connery walked into a bar, you knew basically that he was going to get the information he needed, even if he had to beat the crap out of somebody. Whereas when Roger Moore walked into a bar, it was always a witty line that would get what he needed. And it's a different take. And of course, now here it is, 2024. We've just had 15 years of Daniel Craig, and Daniel Craig was also a bit of a hunky James Bond, although much more of a thuggish type of Bond, a darker character.
And much credit has to go to Barbara Broccoli, the daughter of Cubby Broccoli, who was the original producer with Saltzman, I forget his first name. Harry Saltzman of the original Bonds. And to credit to Barbara Broccoli for casting Daniel Craig, and I think she was in on the casting of several of another one before that. But Daniel Craig was big, and of course, what happened is when the global market exploded, the Bonds became bigger than ever. It's perfect movie for foreign countries.
Another person we have to talk about who had to go to Europe to become a real movie star was Clint Eastwood, who had been in television on Rawhide, had done TV, but it was Sergio Leone putting him in those movies, Good, Bad, and the Ugly, and Hang 'em High. Once again, Arthur, United Artists again. And he was the one, Hugh Jackman said that when he was going to do Wolverine, he didn't have many lines. And he wanted to see who were the best actors who didn't have many lines. And Clint Eastwood, number one. And Mel Gibson in Mad Max 2 was number 2. And that's Julian,
it said that in show business, there were two guys who made zillions of dollars whispering One was Clint Eastwood, and one was Pat Boone, who would whisper into the microphone his song, "On a Day Like Today." They whispered. But, here's a guy, I'll tell you about a guy who was in the business for years before he made it big, who was a hunk. Charlie Bronson.
Yep.
Was around for probably 20 years. And then he broke out in Death
little
Wish.
roles, little bit players.
Dirty Dozen, Mag 7, yes?
Yeah, The Magnificent Seven, The Great Escape. He's also in a movie called Never So Few, which also was one of Steve McQueen's early movies. Certainly Frank Sinatra was the star. How good a movie is Great Escape? I watched that thing on TV recently. It stands up as great as it was in 1963. It got one nomination that year, Arthur. That was the Tom Jones year. Tom Jones swept everything. The Great Escape got a nomination for editing. I mean, come on. Elmer Bernstein's music alone should have won the Oscar.
What one for score? That had to win.
Tom Jones won for Jerry Fielding's score. I mean, come on.
Really? Is that right?
Yeah.
The score of The Great Escape, top 10.
It's of all time. I mean, it's crazy. Now, let me mention an actor from the 40s we haven't mentioned, who I would consider a hunk, Van Johnson. Van Johnson was very popular. He was the go-to romantic leading man in the late 40s. I mean, he's opposite Elizabeth Taylor in The Last Time I Saw Paris. He's in Battleground. He was a bit of a hunk.
Yes,
and he didn't have the competition because most of the guys who were huge hunks were in the Army, Navy, but Van had suffered a car accident and had a plate in his head, so he was unable to be in the armed forces. But I had a dinner with him one night, and we came out of the restaurant, and these two women came charging across the street and oh my God, it's you. And he said, yes, it's Van Heflin. And you had to see their faces. They were really confused. Is that Van? Wait a sec. It was really funny. But, we should really talk about a guy that was just as gorgeous and great as anybody who's ever on the screen. May not be built like Robert Mitchum or whatever, but you can't get better or more charming than Cary Grant. Cary Grant was just great. And he could do anything. He could do comedy. He could do drama. He could do romance. He was just terrific.
But Julian, he was Cary Grant.
He was Cary Grant. And I love his interview when the interviewer said to him, I can't believe it, he said. You're just unbelievable. He said, I can't believe I'm talking to you. And Cary Grant said, I'd like to be Cary Grant.
Yes. You know the story about Cary Grant in the Stork Club in New York? And Sherman Billingsley, who ran the Stork Club, would see him come down from the men's room sometimes. And he went up to him one time and said, Cary, I got to tell you, this is embarrassing, but, you always have like a stain outside your pants after you urinate, don't you shake it off? And Cary Grant said, no, you don't seem to know what happens. How's that, Steve? Any good? As a Cary Grant. Anyway, he said, I invariably, I'm standing next to somebody on the urinal, and then he turns to me as he's urinating and says, you're Cary Grant. And that's why I have the stain on my pants all the time.
That sounds very apocryphal.
There you go. I want to mention a guy who like Charlie Bronson was around for years before he broke through stardom, named Lee Marvin, who was a hunk.
Yeah.
And I would argue that Lee Marvin was the most manly man that Hollywood has ever produced. I mean, he's just at the top of the level there. Absolutely. Also liked to drink too.
Like to drink,
I'd say.
My partner and I had breakfast in the Beverly Wilshire Hotel breakfast room. It's packed with people. In those days, there was smoking in 1970s, and there was cigar smoke, pipe smoke, cigarette smoke. And at the next table was Lee Marvin having his breakfast alone. And for about a half hour, we were there, and all we heard was coughing. Lee Marvin was coughing and smoking and coughing and drinking coffee and smoking and coughing. But he was Lee Marvin. In those days, the hair was totally gray and the eyebrows were off his head somewhere. But he was a great actor. He was great for what he did. He was, a manly man.
Somebody,
in
I heard
Cat
this
Ballou, in Cat Ballou, that was as funny a film, and he was sensational.
Somebody told me a story that they were having. He was handling. I'm not sure if he was the agent or the publicist or the lawyer, but Lee got into some trouble at one of the places in Malibu. Had drunk too much, and he's got to get him home. This sounds apocryphal, but I'll mention it. Apparently, he strapped him to the top of the car to get him home. So this is guys driving down Pacific Coast Highway with Lee Marvin strapped to the top of the car when the highway patrol pulled them over. It. I would love to have been a fly on the wall of that scene, but he drank a lot, and I think Burt Lancaster was not very happy with him on The Professionals, because they're both in The Professionals. Talk about a hunky group. You had Robert Ryan, Woody Strode, Jack Palance.
And Burt Lancaster just came on the scene in that first movie of his with Ava Gardner, The Killers. It just doesn't get better than that for a first movie. It's just sensational. And we can't forget Errol Flynn, because Errol Flynn was hunk on and off screen.
All right.
He defined the word hunk, absolutely.
Milton Berle told me that Errol Flynn missed nothing in Hollywood. He hit every woman that was there, and they loved it. Errol Flynn was a lover. How about Spartacus for Hunks? I mean, the whole thing was based on these guys running around with their shirts off.
Yeah.
No, it's true. It's true.
And John Wayne, we did a whole show on John Wayne, but certainly a big Duke he was the thing. He was something.
Here's one for you guys that you guys haven't hit on. He was really big in the 70s. You haven't even touched on Burt Reynolds at all. Burt was everywhere.
And I think
it was he did the centerfold of Playgirl magazine. There was an image.
My buddy David Gershenson was his manager,
yeah,
and was there for the Cosmopolitan layout, which broke him through. I mean, he was in some movies before that, like Navajo Joe and I forget the names of these things, but then he, the Cosmopolitan thing, I think it came after Deliverance. Is that right, guys? I believe.
Deliverance showed that he could act.
Without question, made him a movie star.
Yeah.
But then came Cosmopolitan and Johnny Carson and Burt Reynolds. Yeah, he was built. He was a football player.
And we
a stuntman.
Yes.
We talk about 1977 being the year of Star Wars and Close Encounters, but that was also the year of Smokey and the Bandit. And that was a huge, huge hit as well.
Oh, if there was no Star Wars, that probably would have been the biggest movie of the year.
It probably would have been. He came over to New Line. I worked on the behind the scenes documentary on. Actually, it was more like behind the scenes electronic press kit on a movie called. What was it called? Anyways, he plays Cookie Kornbluth, the head of the Jewish mafia. Interesting casting. And I interviewed him, and we were having a nice conversation. He said that, there's a lot of guys in Hollywood who can do comedy better than me, Steve. And there's a lot of guys in Hollywood who can do drama better than me, Steve. But nobody does comedy and drama like I do. So that was
He was great. I want to tell you that David Gershenson, may he rest in peace, who managed Burt Reynolds, we were pretty close. And one day over lunch, I said, Dave, what the heck is it like managing the hottest box office star in the business? What is that like? And he said, well, first thing is that everything comes your way. Every good script that runs through the system comes your way. And what happens is that sometimes you miss. And one of those times was a script came to Dave that would go up the ladder in whatever the Burt Reynolds world was. And they'd land with Dave, who was the manager, he'd have the last say. And he would, if he liked it a lot, he'd pass it on to Burt, and they'd talk. And he saw a script called Terms of Endearment. And they had the role of the Jack Nicholson role, which became Jack Nicholson, was for Burt Reynolds. And Bert looked at it and said, and Dave highly recommended it. Bert, this is Academy Award stuff. This is great stuff. He said, it's too little of it. That's not who I am. I got to be the star. No, do it. And he refused to do it and decided he would do Cannonball Run #2, which was a huge success, the first one, and did that instead of Terms of Endearment, and the rest is history. That happens. It happened to Sinatra with a lot of songs. Sinatra missed on songs that went to Nat King Cole. And if you're number one, the message from Dave was, everything comes your way. You're going to make mistakes without question. And there was one of them.
I want to mention two more contemporary actors that I think we need to mention. One is Vin Diesel, who's done those Fast and the Furious movies that have been huge box office hits. And Vin has done a lot of action adventure films as well. And then Viggo Mortensen, who played Aragorn in the Lord of the Rings movies and has done a lot of work all across the board, can be very hunkish, as he is in Lord of the Rings.
There was an actor out of the 40s that we should remember. He was kind of like a B star, but he was a star for a little while, named Sonny Tufts. He became like a joke in Hollywood. Does anybody recall Sonny Tufts?
Catwoman on the Moon.
Yeah, right.
Sonny Tufts and Marie Windsor. How could we forget?
If you see his thing was taking his shirt off and showing off his muscles. And as he got older, he got a belly. And there are still movies, you can see them. If you ever see one of these movies, you'll see him standing in the woods by a river, sucking his stomach in. And it's so obvious that he's sucking in as he's dying for breath. Yeah. Sonny Tufts became a Hollywood joke.
An actor of that ilk also I have to mention is Aldo Ray, who was a big Warner Brothers star for a while there. I know he starred in Battle Cry in '55 and did a number of films.
We're No Angels with Humphrey Bogart.
There you go.
You go. But, Definitely. The one guy that really became a hunk, an action star, but we were all surprised at the beginning, was Liam Neeson. That changed his whole career. He just became a total different kind of actor.
He's
Revenge
kind of
movies.
like Charles Bronson. Neeson and Bronson have had similar careers. Neeson, of course, Schindler's List made him a huge star, but I think you're right. He's become, and the other person that has become an action star and a bit of a hunk. He's a smaller guy, but certainly physically.
He's not a small guy. He's not a small guy.
I mentioned that this guy's a smaller guy, Jason Statham, who does all those action movies, and he's very much the Bronson, like Neeson. The Bronson.
Wouldn't you say that Paul Newman was about as classic a hunk, good-looking movie actor? Good actor, by the way.
Terrific. He was a terrific actor, and he was a Kazan actor. He's an actor studio guy. I saw him on stage in Sweet Bird of Youth. But even when he was a giant movie star, he came back and did Our Town. He was sensational.
Yeah.
And, of course, those blue eyes were the only competition was Sinatra's.
How about Cool Hand Luke, guys? What a movie.
Yeah.
What we have here is a failure to communicate.
Said by
Brother Martin.
Yes. Who's not a hunk.
You also have contemporary. You also have Ryan Reynolds. You guys haven't touched on.
Well, we haven't touched on a lot of the younger guys because
all of the Marvel universe. I think
old.
It's required to be a member of the Marvel universe. You've got to be a hunk, pretty much. Even Robert Downey Jr. I don't necessarily think of him as
not hunk.
Iron Man. He's
Matt Damon, yes, not Robert Downey as a hunk. Exactly. Yeah. Good actor though. Good actor.
So this has been a lot of fun, guys. Let's turn this over to Mike.
Guys, first off, I wanted to say happy anniversary and congratulations. We made it a year. It's really, really awesome that we guys have done this. And we've got a lot planned for the next year already, guys. We're going to be expanding the show. We've got a lot of things we've been already starting to talk about behind the scenes, and you guys are going to see it. And thank you for everyone who's been listening and contributing with emails and writing and suggestions for guests and topics. It's been always awesome. You've reached the end of this episode of the Tales from Hollywoodland podcast. Always remember, we couldn't do this without you. We want to hear from you, so please write us anytime at talesfromhollywoodland@gmail.com. Remember, you could also find Tales from Hollywoodland wherever fine podcasts are found, and now you could even find us up on our new YouTube channel at no extra cost. If you made it this far into the episode, why not subscribe and give us a thumbs up? If you're into social media, please check us up on Instagram and Facebook. But before we get out of here, let's check with the guys and see what's happening on this week's podcast. Julian, who are you talking to this week?
Oh, this week we have Elizabeth Berkley, star of Saved by the Bell, and had a whole career with Showgirls and still kept going no matter what happened. And for the first time, my show is going to be on YouTube visually. It will be not just a podcast, but we'll be able to see Elizabeth, and that is something to see. One of the most beautiful actresses I've ever met.
She is beautiful.
Awesome.
She is a beautiful lady. Yes.
Steve, what's cooking over on Saturday night at the movies?
Oh, we're going to have a summer rerun. I'm actually bringing back Alfred Hitchcock, who I interviewed in 1976. He talks all about the birds, and it's really a lot of fun. I always tell the story that I was in his little office at Universal, and the secretary knocked on the door, came in, and said, Mr. Hitchcock, Grace Kelly's on the phone. And he said, I'll call her back.
That's awesome.
What a great, I can't wait to hear that, Steve. I'm really going to listen to it. That's for sure.
That's very awesome, Steve. Arthur, what do we got coming up on next week's show?
We're going to be talking about the greatest heist films of all time, one of which is Top Cappy. And that's high on the list. And there are many others as well. And so that's what's going to happen on Tales from Hollywoodland.
Awesome, awesome. On behalf of Steve, Arthur, and Julian, thanks again for listening to our show. This is your producer and announcer, Mike Faber. We'll see you here next time on Tales from Hollywoodland. Your Hollywood adventure starts right here.
Hey everybody, this is Jim Adams for Monster Attack. As we head into our 9th season, we've taken a little bit of a change in direction. Now we're looking at the movies that I witnessed when I was in high school, college, and my early adult years. Hey, come experience that experience with us each and every Monday at 5 p.m. on the ESO Network. Monster Attack, the podcast dedicated to old monster movies.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.